worried are you about what would happen if he cannot mend fences with the president and the information he may have in his arsenal?
Well, it raises real concerns about just exactly who's going to be responsible for overseeing this process, and whether or not, people's private information contained on Social Security, which we all treasure a great deal, whether or not that's going to be exposed as part of this retribution between Musk and the president. So it's not a very pretty picture right now, and it raises a lot of serious concerns, not only about privacy, but about security as well.
Well, that's for sure, and it raises a lot of questions, Secretary. It's good to see you again about loyalty. Are the DOGE bros loyal to Elon Musk or President Trump? And if it's the former, should they be fired?
Well, I've had a problem with DOGE from the beginning because it never had a very clear authorization as to exactly where it stood in terms of its ability to do what it was trying to do. I think that raised a lot of legal questions. It raised a lot of questions about whether or not they were responsible to people who oversee the budget and the spending program. But clearly, there is this issue of loyalty now involved because most of the people that were part of DOGE were brought out of Silicon Valley. They were all from the technology area. They were all loyal to Elon Musk. And obviously, it's going to be very important for the President of the United States to determine just exactly who is loyal to who, because they are dealing with very sensitive information, and they have a big responsibility in terms of what they now are trying to do in terms of spending and in terms of the federal employee workforce. So there's a lot of questions that are now being raised.
Well, there's questions domestically, certainly, Mr. Secretary, but there's also questions geopolitically. I think about Starlink, which Elon Musk controls, which helps Ukraine have communication amid an ongoing war with Russia. And we know that Elon Musk has spoken with Vladimir Putin several times. How great a concern is that for you?
Well, it raises some very serious implications because obviously Elon Musk has been involved in a lot of issues that relate to national security. Starlink is one of those. SpaceX, they're probably one of the few operations that can put our satellites in space right now at a reasonable cost. It raises concerns about AI. It raises concerns about robotics. It raises concerns about technology generally, which is very critical to our national defense at the present time. So there are a lot of questions that now are being raised as to what will happen if the president really does fulfill his threat to cut off these contracts to Elon Musk. $38 billion in contracts. A lot of those contracts deal with our national security. So I think they all ought to think twice just about what kind of retribution they're going to do against each other.
Secretary Panetta, we're waiting for something awful to happen in Ukraine based on what we heard from President Trump yesterday. He spoke with Vladimir Putin and said that it was clear Putin said very strongly he had to retaliate for that attack by Ukraine, the long-range drone attack that we saw over the weekend. Interesting moment in the Oval Office as we heard from President Trump and what he thought should happen next when it comes to Kyiv and Moscow. Let's listen.
Sometimes you see two young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other and they're fighting in a park. And you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. Sometimes you let them fight for a little while. You see it in hockey. You see it in sports. The referees let them go for a couple of seconds. Let them go for a little while before you pull them apart.
I don't know if you see these two countries as being the same as school children's having a fight in the schoolyard here, Secretary, but what would happen if you let them fight a little longer? What's he talking about?
Well, I'm concerned about the president's position because I really think it's an abdication of leadership when it comes to trying to see if we can resolve this issue. The president did make an effort to achieve a ceasefire. Yeah. Zelensky and Ukraine went along with achieving a ceasefire. Putin did not. Putin has basically ignored the requests of the president. And if the president really wants to exert leadership here, he's got to make very clear to Putin that if he continues to fight and does not accept a ceasefire, that he will pay a price for that. That's the only way you deal with Putin. And so the president ought to be considering sanctions. The president ought to be considering additional military assistance to Ukraine to make clear to Putin that he cannot succeed in Ukraine. That's the only way to ultimately get Putin back to the negotiating table. I think to allow both of them to continue to fight and kill each other is not the answer.
Well, does he have things he needs to make clear, not just to Russia and Putin, but to China and Xi Jinping, sir? Because he said when they spoke on the phone yesterday, Russia and Ukraine did not come up. Is that a missed opportunity?
I think it is a missed opportunity. Look, the role of the President of the United States, and it's been that way for 80 years, is to stand up to tyrants, and to deal with them from strength, not from weakness. And unfortunately, in dealing with Putin, I think the president is dealing from a position of weakness, and Putin knows that. In dealing with Xi, the problem we have is that the message we are sending to Putin is in many ways the same message going to Xi. And if Xi takes the position that Trump is weak and will not stand tough with regards to tariffs, that presents a message that could hurt us in terms of our national security and in terms of our economy.